All right, the United Nations Security Council, it's approved a resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza.
Israel's longtime ally, the United States, abstained from voting. And experts say this highlights the all-time low in the ties between US President Joe Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who was expecting the US to veto the resolution altogether.
Now, soon after the vote, Netanyahu also abruptly scrapped a visit by a senior Israeli delegation to Washington. The aim of the meeting was to discuss Israel's planned offensive in Rafah.
According to Netanyahu's office, the failure of the US to veto the resolution is a clear retreat from its previous position and will hurt Israel's war efforts. The threat of an offensive in Gaza's Rafah has increased tensions between US and Israel. Experts claim if the crisis is not managed carefully, it's only going to continue to worsen with time.
Now, the suspension of the meeting in Washington, it also jeopardizes the United States' efforts to tackle the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza.
Well, at the same time, it puts a major obstacle in the way of Biden administration to get Netanyahu to consider alternatives to a ground invasion of Rafah.
Biden's decision to abstain from UN voting, it also appears to reflect the growing US frustration with Netanyahu.
Earlier this month, Biden said that a Rafah invasion will be a red line. However, he added that US is not going to cut off military aid to Israel. Netanyahu dismissed Biden's criticism and vowed to press forward in Rafah.
On the other hand, both the leaders are dealing with political pressure. In November, Biden will face his Republican rival Donald Trump as he aims for another term at the White House. The US president faces pressure not just from America's allies, but from a growing number of fellow Democrats, as they call to limit Israel's offensive in Gaza.
At the same time, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is facing domestic challenges of his own. Far-right coalition members are demanding a hard line against the Palestinians, and he is also facing growing calls from hostages' families to bring back their loved ones. And the frequent protests calling for Netanyahu's resignation only adds to those problems.
Now, for more on this, our correspondent Susan Tehrani has sent us this report from New York. Listen to this.
The United Nations Security Council finally passed a resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza for the month of Ramadan. This breaks a 5-month impasse where the U.S. had vetoed several other resolutions prior, and a U.S.-backed resolution was rejected on Friday. The U.S. abstention on Monday allowed this resolution to pass. The U.S. had planned to veto any resolution that called for a ceasefire without mentioning the hostages, but did not veto Monday's resolution because it links the two issues, although the language is different than the resolution put forth by the United States on Friday. Israel's ambassador to the United Nations criticized the Security Council's resolution for once again failing to condemn Hamas's atrocities and attacks on October 7th against Israel, comparing it to the Council's quick condemnation of terror attacks in Russia and Iran, suggesting a double standard. While the chamber erupted in applause after the resolution was passed, it's hard to foresee any real change happening on the ground, at least for now. Susan Tehrani reporting from New York for WION World is One.
All right, now for more on this, we're being joined by Dr. Adna Cohen, who is the Professor of Non-Proliferation and Terrorism Studies at the Middlebury Institute, joining us live from Monterey, California. So thank you so much for joining us. Of course, first things first, this is being seen as a new low in ties between Israel and the United States. How do you see ties going forward?
Well, it's a problem. As long as Bibi Netanyahu remains the prime minister, the rift will be growing. Actually, he's trying to take advantage of that to save his office, to save his own seat by making some kind of pleas for his extreme right-wing coalition partners. The rift that he created with the United States is primarily self-inflicted. It's not good for the release of the hostages. It's terrible for the rest of the deterrence posture, and he became more and more a burden for Israel itself. This is a prime minister in his last moment in office, and he is making incredible pains for his own country.
Dr. Cohen, now it's understandable and it's known that Israel is continuing with the war effort because US supports it. What are the possible reasons for Netanyahu being so adamant on his stance on Rafah? Can they do it without US support?
Militarily, Rafah is not a big deal. The question is how to do it in a way that would not create humanitarian crisis. Rafah, as you know, is crowded with 1.4, 1.5 million people. To remove them is a nightmare. There are 4 light regiments of the Hamas. With them or without them, it's not that kind of big deal. Benjamin Netanyahu making it a big deal in part for domestic reason, in part to achieve what has become more and more unachievable, that is to say, to eradicate Hamas. Israel has done fantastic tactically, and yet strategically Israel fails to eradicate Hamas, because Hamas is not the kind of organization, even if it's going to be defeated almost at any level militarily, it cannot be eradicated politically, strategically, and as an organization. And that's the problem.
Hamas that can be defeated but can't be eradicated. That was Dr. Avner Cohen joining us from Montreal, California. Thank you so much for sharing all your insights with us, sir.
A pleasure. Thank you.